All looks good.
All right. All right. Well, good morning, everybody, on this Thursday before a long Memorial Day weekend. Glad to be here with all of you today. I'm just going to dig in here for our PREETS representative and RAM meeting today. On the next slide, there we are, is our agenda for today. So we're going to start with some of our professional and technical contract updates related to pre-employment transition services that will be important for you to know about. Based on some feedback from all of you, we're going to talk a little bit about authorizations, reports, and invoices. We'll go through the process for exiting cases. Talk about students who are going on to post-secondary education, because there's been some questions about that. Review a little bit about case notes. Touch on being creative during this time of the pandemic. A few other question and answers, and then talk about what's coming next. Sounds like a lot. I think we can get through it all, though. I'm confident. I do want to say that, it's nice when this is, sort of informal. So if you have a question as we're going, feel free to type it in the chat, and Anne will let me know. I won't be watching the chat myself, so I'll let Anne let me know if there's a question. And at certain times, there'll be opportunities to unmute yourself and ask questions as well. So we'll see how this goes together. So I'm just going to move on forward here and talk a little bit about the professional and technical contract changes. And actually, I'm going to see, I think Kim Babine is on the line today. Kim, are you there, and can you unmute yourself?
I'm here. Are we doing video, or should I just turn my video off?
I don't know. Can you see my video right now?
Yep, we can see, we can see both of yours, so it's your choice. Oh. So you both look good.
Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday.
I can't tell what you can see. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah. Oh, are you?
Go right ahead. If you, do you want to go right ahead, or do you want me to start out, or it's up to you?
I'll go ahead.
Winging this today, everybody.
All right. So, hi, everybody. It is good to be with you virtually. I miss seeing all of your faces. We have a lot of changes coming to the PT contracts to make your work hopefully better and easier, and same thing with our community partners. We found a number of things that need to change. So we've got a number of things that we'll need to have amendments for on the contract. So in particular, there's a number of PREETS things. So every contract person who has a contract, every community partner that has a contract with PREETS on it will need an amendment in this upcoming amendment period that I've talked about. So we are waiting to get the last few pieces to fall in place to be able to announce that. I've got it like drafted and kind of ready to go, and we just need a few more answers on a few things to be sure that we're ready to go. So as soon as I can hit send on that, then we will start having the contractors, the PT contract community partners send in applications to amend their contracts. For the PREETS ones, if all they want to do, or if all they have to do is these few PREETS pieces, they probably won't need to send an application. We'll probably be able to just generate that. But most of them will probably want some other changes. So we will just work with them on that. And before I get into the specifics of what's changing, I think it's important for you to know, and I'll continue reiterating this as I communicate out to all staff, is that previously it has been Ann Paulson and me who have worked on the PT contracts. And so all questions have gone to Ann, and we've always just said, ask Ann, ask Ann. Community partners, ask Ann. But we are just thrilled to have Sarah Sundin join the team for now, and she is going to be joining to help with the PT contracts. And we've got a really cool new structure that we are going to try out with having both Ann and Sarah be able to work on it. So what they have done is they've split the providers that we have into two. I think Anne has the northern and then half of the metro, and Sarah has the southern and then part of the metro. And then the ones that operate in different, in more than one region, they split too. It doesn't split equally like east-west metro. They kind of picked and chose which ones. So we can, all you have to do is email Anne or Sarah or me, and we'll get it to the right person. You don't need to keep track of who is the go-to for that that provider, but just know that that's happening behind the scenes. And so when we are working on getting those PREAS amendments through, both Anne and Sarah will be working, and they'll kind of have their groups that they're working with. So that's the behind the scenes, and the things that need to change are the first one, we know that the PREAS wages, work experience wages was not enough to cover the cost for our community partners. So that wages plus 25% was not sufficient. And we have raised that to the wages plus 50% for those administrative costs that go along with that service. So every provider that has that on their contract is going to need an amendment to their contract to be able to do this. So unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, the contracts are, we all have a love-hate relationship with them. They offer us a lot of structure, but if we want to change any little thing, it has to be a full amendment to it. And that takes a little bit of time, and it's, a legal process that we have to go through. The next thing, so we think providers will be really happy about that. Hopefully more of them will get into that business. So if you haven't, someone turned you down a while ago and said, nope, that doesn't work for us. We're not going to be able to make that work. Reach out to them again and see, once they get it on their contract, to see if maybe the new wage or the new fee will be good for them. We are reducing and increasing, switching up the number of titles. So can I navigate to the next slide, or is that only Anne or Alyssa?
I can do it for you.
Okay, will you
please? Here, maybe, but
Perfect.
There you go.
Awesome, thank you. I'll get used to all these technologies. I will. Okay, so we still have the 5 big required services. So job exploration counseling, post-secondary education counseling, workplace readiness training, instruction in self-advocacy, and work-based learning. Previously, under the workplace readiness training, we had in that, we also had, I have it right here, we had benefits information services, independent living services or soft skills training, job seeking skills training, and public transportation training. And those were all separate titles under the workplace readiness training type. We did it that way because we thought we were going to need to track to those specific titles to public transportation training. And we've learned that obviously, it's a really big issue for authorizing. It makes things a lot more confusing, especially if they need a different service, a slightly add-on a service, like you have to do a whole new authorization for that. And we're not really needing that fine detail tracking. And so we're going to combine those into one, and they will all fall under workplace readiness training. So if you want to authorize for job seeking skills training, you will no longer choose that. You'll choose that broader type of workplace readiness training. That'll be what you select. Also, the for work-based learning, there were 5 services listed under work-based learning, and they're no longer going to be separate services. So all of them. So the PREAS work experience wages will still remain separate, as will PREAS work experience services. Those will still be separate because we still want to be able to track those, and those are unique enough. But the others that were listed under work-based learning will no longer be separate services. So those were career mentoring experience, informational interview, job shadow, service learning, and workplace tour or field trip. And so those are all going to be combined into one. And to keep them separate from the work experience wages or the work experience services, we're going to call those introductory work activities. So I know that's a lot to take, but Alyssa and I are working right now to refresh that nice descade of the service types and titles and their definitions. So it'll be more clear when you can see it in that. But just know that those workplace readiness training services will be 4 titles into one, and the introductory work activities will be 5 titles into one. All right, so the other piece, removing the travel differential. Alyssa, I don't know how much we want to go into this. I know we're still getting kind of fine tuning and finalizing what's going to happen with travel and transportation. So I don't think I want to go into too much detail here. That's one of these last pieces to fall into place. Alyssa, did you want to jump in on that?
I just wanted to call that out because I've been getting a number of questions related to the travel differential. Obviously, right now, it doesn't apply for the most part because everyone's providing services virtually. And when you provide them virtually, they're not traveling. But I know that some of you are planning for like work experiences and things like that. And that travel differential may come into play. And so I think it's important to know that we're going to be removing that, but what's going to be in place of that is still to come, just as an FYI for you.
Yep. Awesome. So the other piece is the flexibilities that came from RSA in February that we've talked a little bit about, that now for the pre-ETS eligible students, we do have some flexibility around the pre-ETS intake and job coaching, work experience coaching for those VR eligible students. So we are adding to contracts, again, with this big amendment, is a pre-ETS intake and a pre-ETS work experience coaching. So much like job coaching. And those will be put on at $75 an hour. I know sometimes intakes are each, a certain amount for each intake. We wanted to keep it consistent with that hourly structure at $75 an hour. So we're going to stay with that. And those will be added to contracts. So when you are thinking of authorizing, just keep that in mind. And then also know that it's different for the potentially eligible students, that the potentially eligible students for intake can still be authorized. You can still authorize that first meeting time for the potentially eligible. Did I say that right, Alyssa? I'm going with yes. So those will be added until we get those on PT contracts, because realistically, it'll be at least a month by the time we get all the needed information from our partners and the time it takes to go through the process before we get those out. It's more likely 2 months before everything starts to get settled. And so up until that point, if they have job coaching on their contract, the partner has job coaching on their contract, or is it the same for intake, Alyssa, that you can authorize for that and just make sure to fund the coding, authorize under their existing contract, what's on their existing title on their contract, and just make sure to fund the coding as pre-ETS.
Right, and for the pre-ETS representatives on the line, you won't have to worry about that, obviously. So, but for the counselors authorizing for eligible students, it's just using what the rates are on the contract currently. Yes.
Excellent. So that I just wanted to take, I know I don't want to take too much time, but Alyssa, is it okay if I spend 2 minutes going through kind of the process? So I know we talked about it on the all staff call that we had a couple weeks ago, but I want to keep reiterating how many steps there are in the process and how few of them Ann Paulson, Kim Babine, and Sarah Sundin control. So when we put out and say, hey, well, you can amend your contracts, let us know. So the provider has to give us their application, and it seems pretty straightforward and simple, but often we need additional information, and we need to be able to go back and forth with them. Maybe they don't quite understand the changes in the services or whatnot, and they might not get back to us for a week or something like that. So then once we kind of get it going and it's approved and it's going in the process, there are stops at deed fiscal, and then it goes back to the partner for their signature, and that can be another stop. And then it goes back to AFS deed fiscal. That can be another holdup. And then it goes to the Department of Administration, Office of State Procurement for another stop. And we just are kind of constantly dealing with changing personnel, especially in AFS and Office of State Procurement. So just when we think we've got a good process going, someone new comes and kind of flips it on its head. So we're working on navigating that. I have not mastered that, but it's getting a little better every time. So just know that we're going to get these amendments as soon as possible, and we're going to work really hard, but that nothing ever goes as smoothly as I plan it. And I'm a planner, so I've been trying. So I think that's all we wanted to cover then today. Alyssa, is that right?
Yeah, unless there are any questions from anyone, I would recommend maybe at this point typing them in the chat. So if you have a question for Kim, feel free to type it in the chat, and Anne can let us know if there are any questions. And unless I hear otherwise, Anne, you can always jump in later if there is something. I know, Kim, you have to get off early. Kim has a big day today. She's closing on her house and selling her house. I hope you don't mind me saying that, but
no, not at all. So I'm sorry I have to sneak
exciting.
off, but always be in touch. Feel free to email me and Sarah, anything, be in touch. So I'm sorry I can't stay longer. I'm going to go sign a big piece of paper.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Yep. I just have one quick kind of funny thing I just had to tell you all, because technology is interesting and there's always new things happening that we're learning about. And my husband is home, or was home, and he went in our car just a little bit ago, and I'm hooked up on my phone through Bluetooth, and the Bluetooth is also connected to the car. And all of a sudden I lost all my audio because he had the car and he was sitting in the driveway, and I was like, cool, get out of the driveway. Anyway, so I couldn't hear all of you, and I was worried you were waiting for me to say something. And anyway, I just had to share that because
I did ask you a question and you didn't respond. So that was that, I guess.
Okay, I apologize then, because
No,
when I got back
fine.
on, you were still talking. And I thought, oh, good, I didn't miss anything. So I apologize. Was there something that I should answer now about whatever you asked?
No, I always feel like I might say something wrong. So I was just doing a check of, hey, did I say that right, Alyssa? Okay. So all is well. We're good.
And there was crickets. Anyway, so, okay. Sorry about that.
No problem.
All right. Well, let's move on then.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to hop off.
Okay. All right, Kim. Bye. All right. So here's another big thing to share with you today. And it's a change in policy related to sharing information with our contracted service providers. So bear with me a little bit. I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory to this. So Heather Farmer, who all of you probably know as one of our policy specialists, had learned last fall from the State of Minnesota Data Practices Unit that their legal opinion was that our agency would not need to obtain informed written consent or releases of information, otherwise known as ROIs. So I'm going to say ROIs because it's easier to say, from students or parents or guardians as applicable who are potentially eligible for VR in order for us to share information with our contracted service providers who would be providing pre-ET services, which was exciting to learn. So from there, a decision was made at the leadership team that we would proceed with updating our VRS policies to reflect that change. And then when that was done, we were going to officially share this information with all of you. And in the meantime, as that was all being worked on, I know some of you had come to me with some questions about, or sometimes concerns with getting the releases in order to make referrals to providers. And I know, especially when we're providing group services, this comes into play. And so I told those of you that had connected with me to go ahead and proceed without the ROI, because I knew we were going to be changing that policy shortly, and I didn't want you to have to go through all that work and then have us change it soon anyway. But I didn't officially tell everybody yet because it wasn't, the policy wasn't quite in place. And so we thought it would get in place, but things didn't go quite as planned. So we had connected with our deed attorney, her name is May Parker, just to be sure we're proceeding properly with the policy change. And the long story short of it is that this whole issue didn't get resolved with her assistance until just very recently, and she's been working with the Attorney General and everything. So that's a backstory to this that I want you all to know, because there's been different messages out there. But the short story is that it's good news. We are officially able to proceed with this change. So what this means is, number one, if you are currently obtaining ROIs in order to share information with providers, you will no longer need to continue with this practice. But hold on, because we'll talk a little bit about the new Tennyson notice, but very soon you will not need to continue with that practice. If you are currently not obtaining ROIs, you will be able to continue as you have been. And here are the important things that you need to know along with this. So number one, keep in mind, this only pertains to students who are potentially eligible for VR. So the rest of the agency needs to obtain signed ROIs for students who are eligible and adults who are eligible for VR. Another really important thing to keep in mind is that this only pertains to work with our contracted service providers. So you would still need signed ROIs when you're going to be sharing information with schools, or say with parents or guardians. When a student turns 18, you need to get their permission to speak to their parents, things like that. So, and so number three, and that's really important to know, is that we are in the process right now of finalizing a new pre-ETS Tennyson notice that we'll need to give to all students who are potentially eligible for VR. And so we'll be asking you to give the new notice once it's ready to all new students coming into the system, as well as all potentially eligible students who are currently receiving pre-ETS. So we'll talk through the process of, I think we'll just have to send letters to everybody explaining, here's a new privacy notice. I was kind of thinking of it like sometimes you get in the mail from a credit card company, here's our privacy notice. So it might be just something coming out, oh, we've had to update our privacy notice for this change or something. So we'll talk it through. Maybe we can even send just some sort of form letter or something out to all students out of the admin office. We'll look into that and keep you updated, okay? The other thing to know is that we're going to be explaining this to all of the PT contracted providers as well. And all of the upcoming contract amendments will include some language that explains or has some legal explanation of our ability to share information. So in a nutshell, again, this is really good news. It makes it another thing that makes things a little easier in providing pre-ETS to potentially eligible students. And I really appreciate all of the patience all of you have had on this piece of it. Are there any questions? I'm going to just take a break, just make sure I'm not missing any questions. Or if you have a question related to this, I want to take a moment and make sure we answer any questions, because this is a pretty big thing. And I also want to open it up. I know we have, and maybe I should have done this earlier, I apologize, but we have other leadership on the line today. I know Jan Thompson and Chris McVeigh, I think, is on, and our regional directors, and I might be missing others. So if any of you have something you'd want to add, please feel free to jump in. Dan, are there any questions?
I don't think related to this. Megan Mulkey had a question related to
Okay.
some pre-ETS covering fee, but maybe we can hold that for any kind of connecting.
For now, okay. Let me know when you want to ask that one.
This is Jan.
Jan, I see Jan's coming on.
Yeah, this is Jan. I'm just going to say good morning and hi to everyone. And I don't have a particular comment, but I'm following along and am grateful that you are covering all of these details. Thanks, Alyssa and Kim Babine, even though she was going to get rid of her house. Goodness, that's big news. Okay. Hope you're all doing well. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Jan. Okay, well, if there aren't any questions on this, I'm going to just move us forward.
There might be one, because Joy,
Okay.
and make me sure I'm connected. So Joy has in here, so contracted service providers, including CIL, correct?
That would be correct. Our independent living centers are PT contracted providers, so it does include them as well. Okay. I'm going to move us on. Is there another question? Well, I'll move on and then Ann, you can stop me. Authorizations, reports, and invoices. I know, especially for those of you who are new to the agency, I can put myself in your shoes, even though it's been a while since I started with the agency. But it takes a while to really wrap your head around doing authorizations, what to look for in reports, analyzing invoices, see if we got everything we need, see if everything's correct. And that can take a while to learn and get up to speed with. And then we have everything with pre-ETS being confusing anyway, and then there's changes. So I know any feedback even after today, how we can continue to provide support to all of you on this topic, want to make sure we're doing that. So I'm going to touch on some things today, and we'll, as I said, continue to talk about this topic. One thing that a decision has been made, discussions have been held related to, again, we're always looking at how can we simplify things. I mean, for us within VR, as well as our providers when we're working with the providers, because it's also really hard for them to wrap their head around all of this, with pre-ETS especially. And for various reasons, we thought it would be helpful to think about, or to actually not think about, to implement a new process for when we do when we do authorizations. As you see on here, we have a schedule on here that we're going to try out. We're doing this. We're going to start right now, as of today, with all of you as pre-ETS representatives. This won't be announced for the rest of our VR counselors that are doing pre-ETS authorizations, at least not now. So today, going forward, we're going to implement this process with all of you, in particular because providing pre-ETS to potentially eligible students is a different game than some of the more intensive services. So we're going to start here. We thought it might be easier if we had consistent end dates on all of the authorizations. So I have them listed here. So the end dates that we would ask you to use on any authorization you're doing for pre-ETS would be at the end of each quarter. So if you think of the calendar year, every 3 months is a quarter. So, and starting right now at the next quarter that's going to be beginning is July 1st, and then it goes through September 30th. The next quarter from there, the end date on authorizations would be December 31st, March 31st, and then June 30th. So that our providers can know when they have authorizations, it's going to be, they'll know the regular schedule of end dates, because I know that's one thing that's hard is tracking. Our authorization is going to be up, or, do I have more time? And so, and I think hopefully it'll be easier for all of you as well, just knowing that, every authorization is just going to end on these particular dates. As it says in the next bullet, you can have any start date. So I know as I've talked with some others, there was a question about, well, let's say, you know, for the March 31st end date, what if a service was going to start on March 15th? That doesn't make sense to only have a 2-week authorization. And that's true. It doesn't make sense. So let's say on March 15th, you could decide to have the end date be June 30th then. It doesn't have to end on March 31st, if that makes sense. 2 things to keep in mind, and you probably know this and heard this already, but we do have some hard stops to authorizations already, and they are listed on here. So the end of our state fiscal year is June 30th. So all authorizations need to end on that date anyway, so this lines up with that, as well as all authorizations need to end on September 30th, because that's the end of our federal fiscal year. So you can start, or we ask you to start with this sort of schedule right away. As with everything with pre-ETS, it's, you know, we'll see how it goes. If there's a lot of questions, concerns, problems with it, we'll go, you know, go with the flow and change things as we need to. And I don't want to say that too loosely. We'll communicate that together and get feedback. But I think that this can really help us organize authorizations a little better. And also keep in mind that providers have 90 days from the end date on the authorization to get an invoice in. So hopefully that can also help with more of a schedule for getting all those invoices from the providers too. This is just a reminder about first meetings. I know there's been some questions about that. And of course, because again, we're not allowed with potentially eligible students to authorize for an intake. That's why we have to call it a first meeting. And just remember that and I have in here for every referral, you know, there might be times, however, that maybe if it's a group service, there won't be that first meeting. So you might want to just talk to providers when you're making those group service referrals, whether they want or need the first meeting. But for the most part, they will need them for those one-on-one services, and you'll want those first meetings for the one-on-one services so that you're all talking together about how things are going to proceed. Those first meetings can be 1 or 2 hours, depending on, you know, what you're anticipating the length of time will be. Of course, like with all of our pre-ed services, it's $75 an hour. In terms of what to title that first meeting, it should be within whatever service you are referring for. So if you're referring a student for work experience services, then it would be under work experience services. If it was for job exploration counseling, under that title. But here's another piece to help when there's more than one pre-ET service. So you're referring, say, for three pre-ET services. To make it easier, just authorize under job exploration counseling services for that first meeting, because really that makes sense anyway. If you're going to be meeting with that provider and you're going to be talking about a number of different pre-ET services and, you know, how you're going to go forth with supporting that student, it makes sense to call it job exploration counseling services. So if it's more than one, to make it easier, job exploration counseling services. And this is another question. There's been a lot of confusion about what can providers actually bill for. So I want to review that with you. Of course, the first bullet is kind of the time providing the service, but didn't want to miss that part. The second bullet is preparation time. So this was something that we learned this spring from WinTAC, that we are able to allow our providers to invoice us for their time to prepare for any session in providing pre-ET services. So some examples would be to prepare or maybe even revise lesson plans that they have. That's something I've heard from some of our providers, that they might even have a set of lesson plans, but based on the group of students, you know, the needs of those students, they might need to revise those plans. To prepare content for one-on-one sessions, to get materials ready and you know, I was thinking technology ready, whatever it takes to get things ready for a session with a student is allowable to be billed. The third bullet on there is arranging services. So any communications or attempted communications with students, parents, or schools to get meetings set or to plan or coordinate services is allowable as well. And when it says attempted communications, I know that was a question that came up. There was a provider working hard to engage students and making phone calls and emailing, trying to get in touch with students during this time, and they weren't having a lot of luck. And so the question was, well, can they even bill for that time? They haven't even been able to reach the students. And yes, I mean, the big thing is they just need to be reporting what they've done during the time that they're billing for. Another piece is employer development, and that's a name I'm using here, but what I mean by that are any calls, emails, visits to employers to arrange for work-based learning opportunities for students that you've referred to them. I can include if they're at their desk and they're not with a student and they might be doing internet search for job leads, anything on behalf of helping that student get a job can be invoiced. And then I have highlighted in yellow because, as we said earlier, we're working on the travel, what we're going to be doing with travel. Most likely, we're going to be going to allowing travel to be billed hourly, but we haven't settled on exactly how that's going to work, and we're going to have that figured out very soon so it can be in the upcoming contract amendment. So more to come on this, but I wanted to have a placeholder for travel time so that you know that once we figure it out, that will be allowable. And the big thing that they are not able to bill for is writing their reports. That's included in the fee for service, so they can't bill us time for that. I see some different things popping up. Are there questions that I should stop for right now, Anne, or should I just keep moving forward?
Yeah, I think the questions coming in kind of relate to all of this space now. So I'll start from the top of Megan's. So first, Megan Mulkey said she noticed a $25 fee for supplies for a CRP art camp. Can potentially eligible pre-ets kind of cover that fee? Would that be a possibility for materials or preparation or cost involved in that service?
No. We're gonna have to try to figure out how we handle that if it's registering a student for something outside of our PT contracts. Our PT contractors would need to have it included in their fee for service somehow. We are able to, now with the changes in the flexibilities, we're able to do that with eligible students, but we can't authorize separately for supplies. So let me think more about that one and how we might handle it. Megan, we can maybe talk offline a little bit more, but yeah.
Yeah, it would be great.
We're really not able to.
Yeah, if they rolled it right into the cost, that would be a way to handle it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Thought was asking, and Thought, you can always unmute yourself and clarify more if you need it. He wanted you to address more on referring eligible students as a group to pre-ed services with a set of both having like eligible students and pre-ed potentially eligible students kind of in the same class, of how to think through those. I think it has impact for authorizations or initial meeting versus intake, you know, all of those kind of things. So I'll stop there and give you a chance to talk.
Okay. Well, I know that has been asked over the past year, and that certainly can happen, and it's awesome when it can happen. I mean, the eligible students can benefit from group services, you know, along with the potentially eligible. And it's just a matter of, you know, the coordinating that with the provider. The rates are all the same. So you still, on every authorization, we'll talk about this in a little bit too, but on every single authorization that you're doing for pre-ets, you're always going to have the $75 rate on the authorization. And so the provider bills based on how many students actually showed up. So they'll keep in mind that, you know, it doesn't matter if they're eligible or potentially eligible, how many VR participants we're in the class, and then they'll bill us accordingly. So maybe, Sant, are you off mute and going to clarify a little bit more around your question?
I am. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Well, question falls more, not so much the authorization. That's pretty cut and dry. Question falls more into the line of what documentation do we need to have and provide to a community partner? What's the standard? I know we can't ultimately say, you know, they have to take something, it's their own decision. But what's kind of a standard for the difference? Because I understand the pre-employment transition people, we don't need to get in as in-depth with the release forms if we're doing that. So if we're setting up a class at a school and that both are in there, both pre-employment transition and eligible students, talking about release forms and things for the provider coming in and doing that classroom virtual training, what would that look like? That makes sense?
Yep, I think so. And you can, you know, after I give a response, you can tell me if you have further to say to clarify. But that's a really good question right now. And actually, there's been a group of us, Claire Courtney in the agency is a CARF surveyor. So she's a really helpful resource to our agency because some of this does relate to CARF accreditation that our CRPs need to have in place. And then Sarah Sundin and others have been working on, Ann Paulson, we've been kind of digging in a bit to CARF. So here's what I'll say to this. In terms of referring students over to a provider, there's a reason we have two referral forms. So we set up the potentially eligible referral form separately because we only get a certain amount of information on those students. And so when the provider gets that referral right away, that's the indication, you know, this is all the information we have on this student, and that's why, you know, this is what you'll get for those students. And then, you know, we have our universal referral form and everything that we typically would provide to the provider related to an eligible student. You know, we get a lot more information about those eligible students, and we should continue to share all that information with those CRPs. They need to get that information for their CARF accreditation too. There are questions related to what's going to be allowable under their CARF accreditation. And as we've looked through it, there's what we're going to be saying to providers going forward. So if any of this comes up, let Ann Paulson or Sarah Sundin know, because the message that we want to send to them is that there's not really a lot of clear, there isn't any clear guidance coming from CARF. We are, you know, we have some information that we can share with them on that, and that we want to be getting feedback when they're getting their CARF reviews to know what kind of feedback they are getting. But really, if they want and need more information, bottom line is that they're going to have to work with the student to get that. And that's really kind of where we're at this point, because we're not required. I mean, pre-ETS for potentially eligible students is meant to be a lighter touch service. The Congress and RSA made it very clear that we don't want or need a lot of information to get students going on services. And so the providers just won't get as much information from us on that. So does that help a little bit, Sant? Is there more I can say? If you're on mute right now, I can't hear you. Hopefully that helps. Well,
this whole WebEx thing, you have to unmute your phone and the computer. So no, it did, and it kind of clarified with where the direction I was going. Yeah, I would like to have an offline conversation, you know, with us, you know, at another point regarding this too. So, okay, but thank you.
Okay,
no, you hit it.
Yeah, it's another one of those things, everybody, with pre-ETS being new. I mean, I don't know if CARF ever will have what they're going to do. We've got some guidance, and I'm not going to get into all those details for the providers based on our own assessment of CARF. So we might learn more over time and change our protocols, but right now we don't want to make you have to collect more information than what we are required to collect. So that's why we're going for it that way. Okay. Anne, any other questions for now?
Yeah, Susan Fox had put up related to a little bit of Kim's presentation. So once contracts are amended, will the reps receive a new pre-ETS referral form?
Oh, yeah, because on the referral form, we have all those titles on there. So we do need to update that referral form. And actually, I did talk to Sherry Hendrickson about that the other day. She, of course, is our lead on Workforce One. She does have a request in to get the pre-ETS referral form to pre-populate for all of you. She said it probably is not going to even be done though till September because of there's so many things that need to get in the system. And I know you're all excited for that, but I think it might be good because then we can get these other changes in place, and at least that will be in place for the new school year. So we will keep you updated on when that's going to be in place, but we were talking about how we're going to have to make changes to the referral form. So thank you for bringing that up, Sue.
And Alyssa, I'm taking some notes on the side. I know you're trying to multitask as well.
But you are too, good, because I might miss something, forget.
Yep.
Okay, is that it? Or more?
There's one more. Becky's asking, how much time is reasonable for prep time? And interesting enough, the other day we heard for CRC purposes, they allow like for every hour of training, you get 3 hours of prep time. So if you want any benchmarks, there's some things like those out there. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's been an interesting one. I know one provider right now is requesting 2 hours of prep time for every 1 hour. And we were a little concerned about it. We've had conversations. I've had conversations with Kim Babine. At this time, because again, that's kind of a new change for us too, number one. And so I think we need to get a handle on over time if we want to set more parameters around prep time. We'll be watching that. But it's a new thing, so we kind of want to see how this plays out, number one. Number two is, as you all know, we're in this point where we need to be spending pre-ETS funds. It's a strange thing in government to be, we need to be spending funds, so we're a little more flexible. That I fully anticipate when we're not dealing with the pandemic and we get back to, well, everyone says we're never going to be back to normal, but into a new normal. We're going to get to that point where we're going to be spending all our funds. So we'll be watching that as well. But right now, I mean, we can go on what a provider says they need and, you know, remind them that they need to include, when they give us a report, you know, all these things that are on this slide here, you know, if they are going to bill us for these things, they need to be indicating on the report what they did. So what they did during prep time. And so that at least they're indicating so we know that that time was used actually for prep time and what they did. Certainly come to me, come to Kim with questions about that, and it's another thing we'll be watching over time.
Great. And I have just one more from Danielle that she said, you know, as long as we're going to be updating that pre-ETS referral form, could we change it in a way that we can add the expected graduation date on there?
Yes, expected grad date. And I know there was, I think we got that request a while ago. So absolutely, because I know I have a list of some things we want to change on there. So expected grad date on referral form, I'm going to write that down. And if any of you, all of you out there have anything else that you'd like to suggest for us to consider, let me know. Thank you. Okay, is that it then for now?
That's all I have for right now.
Okay, keep them coming. That's the beauty of these meetings, is all of us hearing questions together and hopefully answers from me or when I can answer them. All right, so getting into, we've gone through this before, but kind of to review it again because it's so confusing. When you're authorizing for work experience, this on this page shows you the three ways that you would be authorizing for work experience services. And some of the documents I sent to you also will go along with this discussion. So we'll start here. So the three types of work experience services. Number one, we call it intermediate job, which is a job. We say intermediate, and that probably pertains more to when we're thinking about our regular VR students that we're serving, because when we say intermediate, what we mean is it's not the job we're going to be closing their case file on. In your case, you can think of it as it's not maybe their career goal job. It's, they need a job while they're in high school. It's that job we all had while we're in high school. So it's when the employer is paying their wages. So basically, it's also known as our typical job placement service. So along with that is the practices that we put in place is that you can authorize up to 30 hours for a provider to help a student with finding a job. So as it says on here, it includes the job search, everything along with that. It also would include the orientation once they get a job and any follow-up services that the provider would deliver to the student to make sure that the job's going well. So 30 hours for all of those items. And if it seems like you're going to need more, it's going to go beyond 30 hours, consult with your RAM and just get the approval from your RAM. So the next level here is, is when a student is wanting and needing a short-term work experience. So this is when the provider is going to be paying their wages. We're going to give funds to the provider to pay the student a wage. In this case, it's site to be developed. So the provider doesn't have an established relationship with a business that the sort of business where the student's going to want to work at. And so they're going to be working on developing that. So for that instance, you can authorize up to 20 hours for that site development, for orienting the student to the site, and for follow-up. And then the third way we would authorize is if it's a short-term experience, but the provider, or maybe it's even our agency, has a site. We've got an employer that's willing to take the student on, so there's no site development. And so we can authorize up to 10 hours, which would include orientation and follow-up. And again, we would give funds to the provider through work experience wages to pay that student a wage. And I'm going to go through a flow chart that goes through all this too, but before I get into that, I just also wanted to say something about the 120 hours and emphasize that this is just a suggested time frame. You don't have to have every work experience, those short-term work experiences, be 20 hours. It's a great benchmark if you're just like, we know we want to do a work experience, we're not sure how long it should be. Okay, let's go with 120 hours. But sometimes there's instances where you want it to be less, and then there are times where it makes more sense to go longer, and that's okay. One thing though is that we wouldn't want to see these be going on like forever, like a whole school year. They're really meant to be short term. And so if the student, is looking because they want to continue work experience, then I would consider having a provider help them with finding a job in the community where the employer is going to be paying their wages. So the thing also to remember with this is that you don't need RAM approval if you do go beyond the 120 hours. So this one, you don't have to worry about, if the student and you and whoever else is on their team think, a 200-hour work experience makes the most sense, that's okay to do. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of the PowerPoint, and there are two documents that I sent out that have the same information. Let me pull them up here. I'm going to first of all pull up The one that's going to be helpful for me to talk through is where it says work experience flow chart. Oops, sorry, I've got to deal with the technology here. So it has all the arrows and whatnot on it, and so that's the one you can have in front of you, but I'm going to pull up the other one real quickly, just say a word about that before I go back to the other one here. So let me share this one. So the other document is 3 pages long, and so it's the same content. It's our accessible version of the flow chart I'm going to be going through with you. So it has the same exact information. It's just kind of listed differently. And so, but some of you might find that this one is better to look through. The words are bigger on it and maybe easier to follow for some of you. But so for those of you, as pre-ETS representatives, you're always going to, on this document, be looking at the left side, looking at how you're authorizing for a student who's potentially eligible. And then on the right side, on the right column, it's students who are eligible. So for the accessible document, the first page walks you through the process for authorizing when it's the intermediate job where the employer is going to pay the wages. The second page takes you through a short-term work experience where the site is already developed. And then the third page takes you through where the site will be developed. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more as we go. Now I'm going to stop sharing this one and share the other document. So give me a sec. No, I don't see it on my screen, so I apologize. Okay, here it is. Okay, so this will walk you through, hopefully you can see this on the page. So just talk through each of those, how to authorize for students when you're thinking of a work experience. So the first thing that you'll want to decide is what type of work experience are you going to be referring a student for. So is it that intermediate job where the employer is going to pay the wages? So you just follow the flow chart, they'll take you through that process. So if it's an intermediate job, you follow the side where it says student is potentially eligible. And then I will tell you, you need to authorize 1 to 2 hours under work experience services for the first meeting. Make sure you complete all 3 pages of the referral form. And then that first meeting takes place. And this reminds you that the placement plan must be written at that first meeting for students that are getting typical job placement. A placement plan must be written. And then you would authorize, again, up to 30 hours for that service. And it reminds you that billable time can also include phone calls, emails, things like that. The provider can bill for that, and that you can go beyond the 30 hours with RAM approval. And so the other side tells you about the short-term experience. So if you know it's a short-term experience, it walks you through the decision tree here. So for the students you're serving, it's students potentially eligible. So you'll always authorize again for that first meeting. You'll complete all 3 pages of that referral form. The intake or the first meeting takes place. And then from there, you'll say, okay, is this a site that's already developed? And it walks you through how to authorize, or is the provider going to be developing the site? And it walks you through that. And then it reminds you that you need to also authorize the wages, the work experience wages. Plus, right now it's 25% admin fee. We'll send this out to you when this changes to 50% later in the year. And that it can be more or less than 120 hours. So anyway, wanted to walk you through this because I think it will be helpful for you in authorizing for work experience services.
Alyssa, there is a question if
Stop sharing.
that makes sense. So we're
Okay.
transitioning from Rich.
Yep.
Rich back there. He said some students may benefit from multiple sites. So for a short-term site, is it 20 hours per site?
Oh, well, I guess that's a question I haven't gotten yet. We really were thinking about, okay, for a per site. And again, you're the RAM, so you can kind of make that final decision if it makes sense. Like, okay, it makes sense for them to look for another site. It makes sense that it would take longer than the 20 hours. So, you know, I think our messaging might still be we'd like to keep it within the 20 hours if possible, but certainly it can go beyond. It would make sense if it makes sense for the student to have more than one site. Yes.
Great, that's
Okay,
it.
I'm not sure if I'm showing here. Okay. I gotta show the PowerPoint again. Okay, is it showing on here, Anne?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. I'm going to take you through some examples. I hope this isn't overkill, but again, I just know that some of this is just hard to wrap your head around. And it's also going to get us into the invoicing and authorizing, invoicing, and report process. So the first example that I'm going to go through is Stephen. He needs help in finding that intermediate job. Oh, can you hear me? I was cutting out on my end. Anne, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, you had just a little bit of disruption, but you're good now.
Okay. So Stephen is a senior in high school who has never had a job. He would like assistance to get a pre-ETS work experience or intermediate job where the employer is going to pay his wages doing stocking at a retail store. He has chosen to work with a provider named Pathways to help him find the job. So this is just another way to walk you through the steps. So the first thing is that the pre-ETS representative will authorize for 1 to 2 hours for the first meeting, again, under work experience services. And then together you'll an agreed upon number of hours for Pathways to assist Stephen in obtaining a stocking job at $75 an hour under work experience services. And then time, once he gets the job, for the provider, Pathways, to orient Stephen to the job and follow up with him and his supervisor to make sure things are going well. Again, that's $75 an hour under work experience services. And as is indicated on the slide, those last 2 bullets, up to 30 hours. That first meeting can be outside of the 30 hours. Okay. So an invoice is received after all of this for Stephen. So what I also sent out to all of you was a sample report and a sample invoice for Stephen. And on the slide, I know that some of you, again, being new to this process, have asked for a little more guidance on, okay, I get invoices, I get reports. It's mind-boggling what I need to do next with them to make sure everything's in place for us to be approving. And I know you're working with your RAMs and talking that through, and but you know, I did my best. I'm not going to say this is an all-encompassing list, but I think it has most items. If anyone has something that is glaring that I missed on this list, let me know. But I think this really can walk you through some of the questions to ask when you get the report and invoice, how to tell if everything's in line in order to be able to approve for the provider to be paid. So the first question is there a report? You know, you get the invoice, but did we get the report? So kind of a basic question, but of course that would be number 1 to ask. And then when you're looking at the report, is there sufficient detail to account for the services outlined within the report? So do you feel like you get a good picture of what happened on each encounter that they had with the student? An example might be you know, if they said, oh, provided pre-ETS self-advocacy services today, and that was it. That doesn't tell you a lot about what happened. But if they said provided self-advocacy services and included going through the 411 on disability disclosure, and we talked about disclosing disability, and we did a worksheet related to disclosure and talked about disability rights, or, you know, whatever it might be, and you're getting more of an idea of what occurred, that's an example of more sufficient detail. And also, as I say in here, are the results from the services indicated on the report? So, you know, we have that on the referral form. What are the results you're hoping to see? By referring this student for pre-ETS, what are the results you're hoping to see? And then on the report, are you feeling like you're getting, you know, they might not say the result is, but are you feeling like, okay, based on the results I said I was hoping to see, you know, am I getting that service? And then you're getting into more of the nitty-gritty, looking at dates and hours. But one thing to look at is, do the dates on the report and the invoice match? And do the dates follow in the dates on the authorization? Obviously, that's very important. And then, do the hours on the report and invoice match? And do they fall within the amount of hours that are on the authorization as well? Obviously, they can't go over that amount. They certainly could be under. Is the correct authorization number indicated on the invoice? Because that's important too. And also, I just learned this myself. I didn't know that there can only be one authorization number on every invoice. So that's something to look for. Is there just one? They'd have to send a separate invoice for a separate authorization, and do those authorization numbers match? Are the correct dates indicated on the invoice?